They don't tell you what happens when time itself breaks. They don't tell you about the structures built from fractured chronology, or the engines that run on stolen moments. But I know. I lived it. And this is the true story of how a ghost train materialized in my cornfield and severed my best friend from the stream of existence. The rural horror that defined my childhood wasn't ghosts or demons, it was the absolute, crushing isolation of the farm, where the silence was so profound you could hear the hiss of the universe slowing down. Our only link to the outside world, a rusted-out stretch of abandoned train track, was supposed to be dead, a relic of a bygone era. It was my psychological anchor, the straight line of truth in a curved world. But on that searing summer morning, the line bent. It was a silence deeper than the grave, a suffocating absence of sound that preceded the arrival of the impossible. Imagine a structure that screams wrongness into the visual spectrum. It was a magnificent, ornate Victorian-style train station, impossibly pristine, standing with aggressive defiance in the middle of the field where only dirt and dedication should have been. This wasn't old, it was new, but steeped in a frightening antiquity, a paradox of perfect, glistening mahogany and glass. The air around it crackled with an uncanny, electrical tension. I was paralyzed, not by fear, but by the sheer, intellectual terror that the fundamental laws of my world had just been shredded. I crept closer, the stalks whipping against my face like warnings, and read the sign hammered into the platform, Station 0. No routes. No destinations. Just the chilling nomenclature of a final terminus. Inside the structure, I heard the faintest chime of a distant bell and the sharp, supernatural whistle of a steam engine, sounds so clear they felt physically forced into the atmosphere, yet the tracks were empty. I reached out, and the shocking discharge of static electricity felt like the station itself was rejecting my presence, confirming it was a living, temporal wound. When I fled, driven by a primal, screaming panic, I carried two immutable facts. First, the station was terrifyingly real. Second, when I returned with my father, it had vanished without a trace, and no one else could ever see it. This deliberate act of erasure, this instantaneous removal of the evidence, was the paranormal entity's first, most crippling move, to lock me in the terrifying cage of my own unbelievable sanity. I was now a solitary witness to a time-travel horror, forever branded by the secret of the impossible architecture, waiting for the return of the deep woods mystery that had chosen my cornfield as its haunting ground. The cycle had begun, and I was merely the first set of eyes to see the scary stories transition from myth to terrifying reality. The monster of isolation wants you alone. But it made a mistake. It allowed for Sarah. Sarah was the disruptive variable, the single person whose eyes didn't filter the world through common sense. She wasn't just my friend, she was my confirmation, the crucial piece of found footage validation I desperately needed. When I whispered the creepypasta of Station 0 to her, describing the aggressive stillness and the perfect, terrifying newness of the abandoned train platform, she didn't laugh. She vibrated with an almost frantic energy, a dangerous hunger for the truth. When we stood together at the track's edge, whispering our hopes and fears into the suffocating humidity, the station suddenly, violently materialized, not a slow fog, but a bone-jarring thump that shifted the earth beneath our feet. This time, the station was active. Sarah, a student of history, immediately dated the architecture to the late 1890s, yet its physical condition was frighteningly contemporary. It was a temporal paradox made solid. Our investigation quickly escalated from observation to genuine terror. Through the flickering gaslight of the ticket office, we saw the figure of a gaunt, immobile ticket agent, its posture rigid, endlessly examining an unseen manifest. But the true horror lay on the platform, the colossal, black steam engine. It was immaculate, silent, and its carriages were uniformly sealed, their windows heavily tinted, like the opaque eyes of something ancient and aware. The time distortion was palpable, my wristwatch would leap forward by entire hours and seconds, only to return to the correct time just as suddenly. Sarah pointed to the corn near the tracks, where a flower would visibly age from bud to withered husk before snapping back to vibrant life, all within the space of a breath. This was not a ghost, it was a fixed point where the laws of physics were being perpetually violated. Sarah became obsessed with the sealed train carriages. "They're not empty, Eli. They're full," she argued, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. One evening, under the bruised sunset, a window briefly cleared its tint, and we saw them, a crowd of pale, silent figures, their faces pressed against the glass. They were dressed in out-of-date clothing, their expressions frozen in a singular, overwhelming moment of terror. Most chillingly, their eyes didn't follow us, they stared past us, at a future we couldn't yet comprehend. They were the supernatural passengers of Station Zero, waiting for a destination that was no longer physical, but temporal. As the low, discordant cacophony of disembodied voices began to chant in the air around the station, reciting numbers and dates in a haunting, cyclical pattern, Sarah made her fatal declaration: "It's a gate. I have to see where the time goes." The fear of the rural horror was now replaced by the terror of the imminent, and I knew the station, the predatory uncanny structure, had found its next victim in the one person who could truly see its terrifying reality. The night of the storm didn't just bring rain. It brought the harvest. The sky ripped open with a visceral violence, the kind of torrential downpour that signals cosmic fury. The wind screamed through the valley, not just a sound, but a deafening noise that blocked out all reason. I saw the blinding, epileptic flash of light in the cornfield, the catastrophic energy signature of the station's final, devastating return. This time, the station was luminous, its internal yellow light throbbing like a sick, infected wound, and the melancholy whistle was now a continuous, frantic shriek, vibrating deep in my chest. I fought the wind and the mud, my mind screaming with premonition, finding Sarah already standing dangerously close to the platform, her face transfixed by a mad, ecstatic glow. In her hand, clutched like a religious relic, was the single, fatal piece of evidence, a tarnished brass ticket. Destination, Station Zero. One way only. The sheer supernatural terror of the scene was overwhelming. The air was thick with the scent of ozone, steam, and something metallic, the reek of broken history. The carriage door, previously sealed, was grinding open with the sound of tearing metal, spewing out a plume of hot, sickly sweet-smelling steam that carried with it the metallic tang of ozone and old blood. The time distortion here was absolute, raindrops hung motionless, crystallized into instant ice, then disintegrated into dust. The disembodied whispers had coalesced into a unified, expectant chant, their voices weaving Sarah's name into their horrific liturgy. I screamed her name, but my voice was swallowed by the engine's deafening shriek and the wind's fury. She turned, her eyes glazed over, the last trace of my friend lost to a terrifying, fatalistic certainty. She stepped onto the platform and into the gaping, lightless void of the open carriage door. The sound that followed was the sound of existence being torn. The carriage door slammed shut with a concussive boom that shook the ground. The train accelerated with an impossible whoosh, a weightless, frictionless sound of something leaving reality itself. The station, the train, the lights, Sarah, they all vanished in a terrifying, instantaneous implosion of light and sound. I was thrown back into the mud, my ears ringing with an empty, eternal silence. When I struggled back to the spot, expecting chaos, there was only the perfectly flat, wet ground, and the unnervingly neat rows of corn. The rural horror had cleaned its plate. All that remained was a single, physical scar, a smooth, black, perfectly spherical stone, lying precisely where the final set of tracks had been. It was hot to the touch, and where it lay, the mud had been baked instantly dry. But the true horror was its surface, it wasn't stone at all. It was an impossibly dense piece of melted, coagulated glass and metal, its surface imprinted with the tiny, faint pattern of Victorian lace, a pattern I recognized from the collar of Sarah's favorite blouse. The ground had consumed the truth, leaving only this single, synthetic scar, marking the point where my friend had been excised from our timeline and plunged into the absolute, terrifying unknown of Station Zero, a victim of the purest form of supernatural terror. They ruled it a runaway. I knew it was a temporal crime. For 20 years, the silence was my punishment, the melted stone under my floorboards my secret, unbearable truth. Sarah's disappearance, a footnote in the local archives, was my entire history. I left the farm, seeking the anonymity of the city, but the paranormal reality of the deep woods mystery followed me like a shadow. I lived every day chained to the memory of the steam engine's shriek, forever listening for the melancholy whistle that signaled the end of time. My obsession with the abandoned train tracks led me to dusty archives and forgotten history books. The climax of my long, private investigation came in a cramped, humid city market. Sifting through a box of antique ephemera, I found it, a piece of heavy cardstock, yellowed with age, bearing the indelible ink stamp of the destination, Station 0, one way only. The ticket was identical to the one Sarah held, but this artifact was dated with an impossible year, 1908. This wasn't a random souvenir, this was a manifest, confirming the station was a fixed, recurring wound in the regional chronology. The true terror deepened when I noticed the tiny, stylized monogram on the ticket's corner, a minuscule S entwined with a railway lamp, Sarah's unique design. The ticket was a relic of her impossible journey into the past, confirming she had traveled to a time before she was even born. My research uncovered ancient, cryptic mentions of a ghost train in the region, always associated with instantaneous disappearances and bizarre, localized time distortion. The chilling realization was shattering: Sarah wasn't snatched, she was displaced. She had entered a fixed temporal loop where time flowed differently, or perhaps, didn't flow at all. The ticket was not a record of her beginning, but a haunting fragment of her end. The most devastating revelation lay in an old newspaper clipping from 1908, an entire family vanished near the very tracks on that exact date. The horrifying theory formed in my mind: the station was a predatory machine, appearing to collect people from different timelines to serve as its perpetual passengers, powering its journey through the voids of chronology. Sarah hadn't been murdered, she was condemned to the crushing stillness of the past, forced to age and witness the relentless, cyclical flow of time from the terrifying confines of the black carriage. The supernatural engine required a continuous supply of the displaced, and the uncanny silence of the cornfield was its chosen hunting ground. I was now armed with the full truth of the time travel horror, but the ultimate manifestation of the terror still awaited, a final, visual confirmation hidden in a simple photograph taken long ago. The ghost train is not just in the past. It's in your memories. The horrifying implications of the ticket, that Sarah was now a relic of 1908, sent me reeling back to my father's farm, to the source of the rural horror. I found the dusty, untouched family photo album, the final archive of our vanished innocence. There, nestled amongst the faded snapshots, was the crucial picture, a self-timer photo taken by Sarah on her new camera, just weeks before her disappearance. It was a picture of us, smiling, standing by the tracks, the epitome of naive scary stories victims before the terror began. I knew what I was looking for, and with trembling hands, I magnified the image on my screen, pushing the pixels to their absolute limit. In the distance, right at the vanishing point of the single track, a faint, dark smudge became visible, the black steam engine. It was the ghost train, perfectly centered in the background, a silent, paranormal witness to the moment. But the true, soul-crushing terror was found within the blurred window of the train's last carriage. I zoomed in, battling the grain and the light distortion, until the shape became horrifyingly distinct. There was a figure pressed against the glass. It wasn't the teenage Sarah who had taken the photo. It was a face of impossible age, a terrifying tapestry of deep, cavernous wrinkles and translucent, paper-thin skin. Her eyes, wide and vacant, stared out from the past, the same eyes that had stared past us from the window years ago. Yet, the expression was the ultimate betrayal, a faint, resigned smile. Most damningly, her hand was pressed flat against the glass, displaying the intricate pattern of Victorian lace from her favorite collar. But the final, paralyzing shock was the direction of her gaze. The wizened Sarah in the 1908 train was not looking at the younger version of herself, nor at the younger me in the foreground. She was looking directly at the camera lens, straight through the glass, meeting my own terrified stare across 2 decades of broken time. She wasn't just in the past, she was watching me from the past, a perpetual, silent spectator to my guilt. The supernatural entity hadn't just taken her, it had placed her in a position to endlessly observe her own loss and my subsequent torment. I realized the true horror of Station Zero: it doesn't just collect passengers, it creates found footage witnesses trapped in temporal amber. I still live by the cornfield now, listening for the impossible shriek. I check the tracks daily, knowing that the terrifying cycle is about to renew, and the deep woods mystery will soon require another victim to feed its chronal engine. My horror narration is my final testament. If you hear the whistle, or see the Station Zero sign, don't look, don't listen, and for the love of God, do not buy the ticket. That carriage door is waiting, and its one-way trip is eternal.